Hi, I'm Phelan. And last month, my sister poured boiling tea into my lap because I wouldn't pay for her vacation to Greece. But that wasn't the part that broke me. What hurt worse was realizing she'd already booked the trip weeks under my name, using a credit card I never knew existed. And no one in my family said a word. Not when she drained my savings. Not when she forged my signature. They just smiled, passed the salt, and called it sisterly tension. So why did I end up sitting in a courtroom, holding a binder instead of an apology? And how did something as small as a teacup unravel everything? The table looked the same, but I didn't belong to it anymore. I had folded the napkins just like I used to, made the coffee stronger than usual. Rowena said it reminded her of Dadand, arranged the salad with that same garnishing trick Isolde always praised. But as I looked across the yard, watching my sister bask in the laughter of our extended family, I realized something had shifted. No one noticed the hands that prepared everything. They were all too busy admiring the one with the perfect smile. Rowena's 70th birthday was meant to be a peaceful gathering. Backyard, homemade desserts, light music. My job was to keep things calm. It always had been. Even when I was young, I was the one smoothing things over when the dog knocked over the punch bowl, or when Isolde cried because her cake didn't have enough roses. Now, I was still the same Phelan, but this time I wasn't willing to play my part. She brought it up like it was nothing. Mid-bite, mid-laughter, mid-everything. I've been thinking. Greece might really help me heal. Her tone was syrupy sweet, just loud enough for the cousins at the next table to hear. She glanced at me, that subtle look she'd mastered, like she was cueing me to say yes. I didn't. I can't this time, I said, almost too softly. Her fork paused midair. Sorry? I said. I can't. I'm not in a position to help with that. The breeze died, or maybe it was just the silence that followed. Even the backyard wind chime stopped moving. Rowena didn't look at me. Not a twitch. You're serious? Isolde asked, voice now too quiet. I nodded once. I didn't owe her an essay. And yet, my heart thudded like I had committed a crime. It wasn't about the money. God knows it covered enough dental bills, late rent, student loans she never finished paying off. It was about the assumption, the fact that she didn't ask. She announced, like she'd done 100 times before, always with that tone, always with that public stage, just enough audience to make me the villain if I said no. After the plates were cleared and the desserts devoured, I found myself in the kitchen alone. I didn't want to be, but apparently, I was the only one still on cleanup duty. She walked in without knocking. That's how you know someone still thinks they own you. You embarrassed me in front of everyone, she snapped, closing the fridge harder than necessary. I didn't mean to. I started, then caught myself. No, I did mean to. I said what I needed to say. You could have said it later, privately. I could have, but you didn't ask me privately, did you? There it was. The moment where everything flipped. For once, I wasn't folding, and she didn't know what to do with that. You've changed, she muttered. I wiped my hands with a towel and didn't answer, because maybe I had. That night, back in my apartment, I tried to distract myself with emails, anything. But my inbox had other plans. A reservation confirmation, forwarded from an account I didn't recognize at first. Isolde's side email. A trip booked 2 months ago. Luxury resort in Santorini. Spa appointments, flights, all prepaid. Under her name. But the billing details? Mine. There wasn't a request. There had never been one. Just an assumption. She'd made the decision, and I was just supposed to catch up. And when I didn't, she turned the crowd against me, like she always had, softly, subtly, smiling. I closed my laptop without finishing the email, walked over to my file drawer and pulled it open. Inside, bank statements, receipts, and a small USB I hadn't touched in years. It wasn't rage that settled in my chest. It was clarity. I was never her sister. I was her funding model, not anymore. I didn't have a destination in mind when I pulled away from her driveway that day. I just needed to feel motionsome evidence that I was still in control of something, even if it was just the car beneath me. After looping around the same 3 blocks twice, I let the wheel decide for me. My turn signal clicked without conviction, and somehow I ended up back at my apartment. Quiet, unseen. A few days later, I got the text from Rowena. Brunch on Sunday? Just a little get-together. It's time we all moved on. I stared at it longer than I should have. Not a word about what had happened. No mention of the tension or the awkward silence that wrapped around the birthday table like plastic wrap over leftovers. Just brunch. Still, I said yes. I told myself it was to keep the peace, but deep down, I think I wanted to see if anything had changed. Maybe someone would say what I couldn't. Maybe someone else saw it too. Sunday came fast. The sun was trying its best to shine through a low ceiling of Oregon clouds. I pulled up to Mom's house and parked in the exact same spot as last time, though now the gravel beneath my tires felt colder. Lined in front of the house were familiar cars, 2 cousins from Tacoma, Rowena's old friend Marcy. Not enough people for a distraction, just enough for an audience. Inside, everything was too warm, too cinnamon-scented, too carefully arranged, like the house was apologizing for what its people refused to acknowledge. I took a seat near the edge of the table. Isolde was already at the center, retelling a story about Bali that somehow involved 3 ex-boyfriends and a sacred monkey. I smiled politely. It was the required tax of attendance. Then she caught my eye and offered me a cup of tea honey chamomile, her forgiveness flavor. "Thought you could use something calming," she said sweetly. I accepted it. I shouldn't have. "Listen," I started, my voice low. "I know things got a little strained at Mom's birthday. I just wanted to make sure Isolde didn't let me finish." "Well, some of us," she said with a smile so tight it could cut glass, "know when to keep family matters funded." The steam from the cup stung my nose as the word settled in. Funded. As if my worth began and ended with a bank statement. I looked away, not because I was ashamed, but because I was calculating. And that's when I felt the cup tip. Scalding liquid spilled across my lap, seeping into the fabric of my jeans with merciless speed. I gasped, not loud, just enough to pull my breath out of my throat. The ceramic clattered against the plate below, but no one jumped. No one gasped. No one asked if I was okay. Rowena, from across the table, finally murmured, "Isolde, be careful next time, please." Next time? I stood up, legs burning, and excused myself like I had simply spilled gravy or knocked over a napkin. My chair scraped against the tile in that way everyone notices, but still, no one followed. The bathroom was colder than I remembered. I peeled my soaked jeans off my thighs and stared at the red blotches forming beneath pale skin. My reflection looked like someone I didn't recognize still, contained, holding in something too large to carry but too dangerous to drop. No tears came. I wasn't shocked enough to cry. They all sat there. No napkin offered, no eyes lifted. They didn't pour the tea, but they let it happen. I toweled off what I could, changed into old yoga pants from the emergency bag I kept in my trunk, and walked back through the hallway. Laughter erupted from the kitchen, Isolde's voice, telling Mom something about airline points. I didn't interrupt. I gathered my coat and purse quietly, said a soft goodbye that no one heard, and let the front door shut behind me with its usual creak. The wind outside wasn't cold, but the wet fabric sticking to my skin made everything feel like winter. I walked to my car with measured steps, holding myself as if I might fall apart otherwise. Once inside, I sat motionless, keys still in hand. My phone buzzed. It was a calendar alert I hadn't seen in years. Dentist appointment for Isolde, paid by you. I laughed, one short, bitter breath through my nose. That burn wasn't the worst part. It was realizing I paid for it. It wasn't rage that settled in my chest that day. It was clarity. Cold, sobering, sharp as glass. I was never her sister. I was her funding model, her fallback, her plan B, not anymore. After that brunch, After the insult and the burn literal and emotional, I didn't storm out of the house in a blaze of fury like someone in a movie. No, I moved through the next few days like I was walking underwater. The world kept moving, but something inside me had stilled. I was brushing against invisible walls, things I hadn't named yet, but had always been there. 3 days passed. Then, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, I texted my mom and said I'd be stopping by to grab a few old college books. It was a thin excuse, but it worked. Something casual, familiar, believable enough not to raise any alarms. She didn't ask questions, just waved me in like always, still wrapped in that fuzzy throw blanket she kept on the couch, her eyes glazed over by a home renovation show rerun, the kind where everything gets knocked down and rebuilt prettier, shinier. Isolde wasn't home. I hadn't asked, but I had hoped. I made my way down the narrow hallway to my old room, the one they still called yours when they needed something, but that had quietly become a storage closet with better wallpaper. The door creaked the same way it always had, a sound that used to mean comfort. Now it just sounded tired. The scent hit me first, lavender and thyme. Faint, like a memory. Everything was still there, the peeling floral wallpaper I used to hate, a shelf of knickknacks that hadn't meant anything in years, and a dusty science fair trophy I barely remembered earning. A bulletin board still hung above the desk, empty save for a few faded pushpins. No photos, no notes, no evidence I'd ever lived a life in that room beyond what they chose to leave behind. I crouched to look beneath the bed. There was a bin labeled "Photos What I Had Come For," or at least what it said I was coming for. But then something else caught my eye. Another box. No label, just dust and weight. I hesitated, then pulled it out slowly. The lid resisted. I lifted it anyway. Old envelopes, receipts, some tax paperwork, a few things shuffled into folders. At first, it looked like the usual clutter until I saw my name. A manila folder. Phelan scribbled across the front in blue ink like an afterthought. I opened it with fingers that had gone cold. Inside were papers, photocopies of credit applications, some from years ago. One listed an old apartment I hadn't lived in since my mid-20s. Another had my social security number, but it wasn't written in my handwriting. My stomach turned. Then came the email printouts, application confirmations, payment plans, a customer service response from a furniture store I'd never been to. The IP address didn't match mine. I didn't even recognize the login details. Page after page, my name-me identity used like a discount card. Over and over, dozens of purchases, dozens of lies. And suddenly, I knew. This wasn't a slip-up. This wasn't a one-time emergency or a desperate mistake made in a crisis. This was infrastructure, a system, and I'd been the foundation. Beneath the folder, tucked between a stack of receipts, was a photo. Me and Isolde, standing outside my beat-up Camry. I recognized the moment before I remembered it. She'd just finalized her second divorce. Her credit was shot. She'd cried on my couch for hours that night, saying she couldn't sleep from the anxiety. I sold my car that week, took the bus, walked in the rain, told myself it was temporary. That's what sisters did. She'd hugged me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "I'll pay you back with more than money, I promise." What came after wasn't payback. It was more asks, more guilt, more silence. And now, here was the proof. I sat down on the edge of the twin bed. The springs groaned beneath me, like they had the night I sobbed into this same mattress after my first breakup, thinking the world had ended. But this grief was older. It had been waiting. She hadn't made a mistake. She had made a strategy, one that only worked if I stayed confused, or loyal, or ashamed. But I wasn't any of those things anymore. I pulled out my phone and began taking photos, one document at a time. No flash, no filters, just evidence. When I finished, I put everything back exactly as I found it. Folder, lid, box. The dust would settle again, like nothing had changed. But everything had. As I walked back down the hallway, my heart thudded low and steady. In the living room, Mom was sipping tea, half listening to a couple argue about tile samples on TV. "Oh, before you go," she said, not looking up, "tell Isolde thanks again for fixing that credit mix-up last year. She really saved the day." I stopped, just for a second. My fingers tightened around my phone. My mouth opened, closed. Then I nodded once. Quiet. Distant. Outside, the sun had begun to slip behind the neighbor's roofline, throwing long, lean shadows across the sidewalk. The kind of shadows that only stretch when something is setting. I stood by my car for a while, letting the air cool my skin, letting the truth settle deeper than the betrayal. That day, I didn't just find a box. I found her blueprint, and I was done being part of it. The walk home was a blur of concrete and silence. I didn't take my usual detour by the market. I didn't stop at the corner cafe for a hot tea. I didn't even notice the neighbor's dog barking behind the rusted gate. My thoughts had funneled into one sharp line. That box under the bed, and the things it didn't want to tell me, but couldn't help revealing. The moment I closed the door behind me, I didn't bother to take off my shoes. I tossed my keys onto the counter, bypassed the mess in the sink, and headed straight for the dusty scanner I kept on the shelf, the one I only ever used for lease agreements and old tax forms. I unfolded the papers I'd stealthily photographed from the box and began feeding them through the machine, one by one, quietly, methodically. The only sound in the apartment was the soft whir of the scanner's rollers, steady, mechanical, and oddly comforting. That's when I saw it. A refund form from a local electronics store. I'd never been there in my life. But there it was, my name, printed in bold at the top. And at the bottom, a signature. Not a forgery exactly. It was close, but not close enough. The last letter in my name wrong. Off by one stroke. Off by one careless flick of her pen. She didn't even know how I spelled my own name. I stared at the signature, heart slowing. That one-letter "it" spoke louder than anything else. It said, "You weren't important enough to get right." Not to her. Not even when pretending to be me. And for a second, that hurt more than the fraud. I slid the paper into the scanner and hit start. The machine made a soft, almost mocking churn, like it was laughing under its breath. It really was that simple, wasn't it? Years of trust reduced to clerical laziness. Later that night, I sat at my desk, lit only by the blue glow of my laptop. I opened my email and, for the first time, typed in the words it avoided for months. Refund, authorization, account verification. Emails flooded in some routine, some oddly formal, many too polished to have come from me. One after another, I found them. Receipts, requests, approvals all signed off with my name, but not my voice. Best regards, sincerely yours. Phelan K. Langley. I never used best regards. I never added my middle initial, not once. It wasn't that she was trying to hurt me. She just didn't think she needed to be careful. I clicked over to social media. Her profile was still public. I searched my name. Nothing. No tagged photos, no birthday posts, no memories, no mentions. Not even the cheerful comment from 2 years ago. Couldn't survive without my sister, erased, like I never existed. She hadn't just blocked me. She'd rewritten the story without me. Scrolling back on my own timeline, I found an old post from the year of her second divorce, the year she crashed on my couch for 3 months, just until things settled. I remembered the caption she'd written. My rock. My reason I survived. Gone. Vanished like a temporary thank you card. Like I was the tissue you crumple and toss after a good cry. I leaned back from the screen, my throat dry, my chest still. Not angry, not devastated, just reordered. My brain was no longer reacting, it was archiving. I walked to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and set it down untouched. I retrieved the printed refund form from the scanner tray and slid it into a clean folder I labeled in block letters, for legal review. I didn't know yet what I was building, but I knew I had to build it outside of my own memory. This wasn't about confrontation. It was about documentation. I was done yelling into the wind. I wanted a paper trail, one she couldn't delete or reword. As I returned to my desk, my laptop screen dimmed. I closed it softly and let the darkness settle around me. The quiet wasn't lonely, it was deliberate. I was no longer trying to be heard. I was preparing to be believed. Then I remembered Thora. She worked part-time at the local credit union. Kind, detail-oriented, the type of person who remembered everyone's birthday and once helped me straighten out a card fraud situation when my debit number was skimmed. I messaged her, "Hey, could use your eyes on something weird if you have a sec." 10 minutes later, the screen lit up. Video request. Thora's face appeared freckles, glasses slightly crooked, a wall of ivy spilling over her porch in the background. "You look like you just saw a ghost," she said. "Close," I replied. "A ghost with my handwriting." Her brow furrowed. "You mean that thing from last year?" I didn't want to jump the gun, but now... She reached off-screen and returned holding a folder. Yellow, labeled, worn. "I kept a copy," she said. "Didn't sit right. I figured just in case." She turned the camera, and there it was. A form submitted under my name. Same handwriting, same clumsy initials, same signature slip-up. I closed my eyes for a second, breath steady. Some debts don't get paid in money, they get paid in evidence, and I had just collected my first receipt. That same sentence kept looping in my head as I parked outside my mother's house. Pattern confirmed. Not just a gut feeling, any more proof. Tangible, layered, cold. I stared at the worn siding of the house, clutching the old storage box in the passenger seat like armor, half filled with random paperbacks and cookbooks I didn't want back, the other half just space. I needed an excuse to walk through that door, to sit across from her without storming in like a daughter on fire. When Rowena opened the door, her smile was soft, too soft. That kind of rehearsed gentleness people put on when they know what's coming, but want to pretend they don't. "Isolde's out running errands," she said like it was the news I came hoping to hear. It wasn't. But I nodded anyway. The house smelled like overripe bananas and something sterile lavender floor cleaner, maybe lemon. Comfort and concealment, under one roof. Every creak of the floorboard brought up a memory I didn't ask for. But I followed her to the kitchen anyway. We sat across from each other, not talking. There were teacups between us, untouched. "I wasn't here for tea." "I saw a new picture on your fridge," I said, keeping my tone flat. "Oh, that?" Rowena's voice went up a notch. "Marcy brought it over. From the reunion last year." Last year. The reunion I wasn't invited to. I remembered the photo. It used to have me in it smiling, caught mid-laugh. The new version on her fridge didn't. I'd been cropped out so cleanly, you'd think I never stood there. "A lot can be edited out these days," I murmured. Rowena offered a small, fragile smile, but didn't comment. I leaned back, fingers curled around the ceramic cup, still untouched. "I found some things," I said after a beat. "A few things, actually. Refund forms, open accounts, emails in my name." She sipped her tea finnily, like she'd been waiting for a cue she wasn't sure would come. "She's just been stressed, Phelan. You know how she gets. When money's tight and she feels overlooked." She used my name, Mom. Not just once, multiple times. Opened refund claims, submitted online forms using my credentials, deleted me from family photos online, even changed our settings so I'm not tagged in anything. Rowena's expression tightened, but she kept her voice calm. Controlled. "She didn't mean to hurt you." "She knew," I said clearly. "She chose." That landed. Her eyes didn't dart away this time. She just looked still, as if the words had weight, but she wasn't sure how to carry them. I didn't wait for a defense. I'm not going to let it happen again. If it does, I'll take action. Real action. Legal. Rowena's cup paused halfway to her mouth. When she set it down, her voice lowered. "You wouldn't do that to your sister." I met her gaze. "I didn't." She did. That was the first time we really looked at each other, no filter, no polite script, just truth. The silence that followed wasn't agreement, but it wasn't denial either. It just hung there, thick as molasses. I stood. She didn't ask me to stay. Maybe she understood something new now, maybe not. But before I reached the front door, she called after me. Would you mind grabbing the old thank you cards from the desk? I was going to sort through them tonight. I turned, nodded once, and walked into the front study. Her desk was organized, as always, top drawers labeled, bottom drawers stuffed with older things she couldn't throw away. I pulled the bottom one open. There they were, a thick stack of blank thank you cards. I was about to grab them all when something caught my eye. A card already addressed. To whoever helped me through the last 3 years. It was signed, simply, Isolde. Inside the envelope were multiple identical copies, same message, but with different names penciled lightly at the bottom, like placeholders. Phelan, Mom, Alex, if he helps again. She didn't write me a thank you. She wrote a template. Every kind gesture she'd extended to me in the past few years, every seemingly heartfelt note or posted quote flashed through my mind. They were scripts, placeholders, words for whoever happened to be useful. Even gratitude was a calculation. I took a photo with my phone, slipped the card back like nothing happened. Closed the drawer. When I returned to the kitchen, I handed her the stack without a word. She didn't ask what took so long. Maybe she didn't want to know. Maybe she already did. That night, in my apartment, I opened my laptop and created a new folder on my desktop, Isolde Case Building Phase. I dragged in the scanned refund forms, the photo of the thank you card, the bank screenshots Thora had sent me last week. Evidence, all of it. I created a subfolder, Manipulation Evidence. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, without hesitation, I typed, Pattern confirmed. And for the first time in weeks, I felt steady. Some truths don't yell. They're filed in folders. There's a kind of silence that doesn't mean peace, it means precision. That was the silence in my apartment that night, as I finished organizing the last of the documents I'd pulled from Rowena's drawer. Manila folders lined my desk like a timeline of things no one ever wanted to speak out loud. But paper never lies. The ding of my phone broke the silence. An email. Bank fraud alert. I expected something small, maybe a flagged login attempt, maybe a phishing warning. But as soon as I saw the subject line, unusual activity, on account ending in 779 now, my stomach tightened. The card it referenced had my name, my old address, even my old office phone. But I didn't remember applying for it. Not ever. Curious but calm, I clicked the activity log. Within seconds, I wasn't calm anymore. Over the past 2 years, the card had funded shopping sprees at high-end boutiques in Seattle, a $3,200 wellness retreat in Arizona, and a spa weekend in Sedona that included something called a sound bath immersion. Each charge was marked verified. Each location, it'd never set foot in, but I knew exactly who had. Phelan. Her name wasn't on the card, but her fingerprints were all over it. She hadn't just hurt me once. She was still taking. Even after everything, the hot tea, the smug silence at dinners, the rewrites of our shared past to erase my presence, she kept going. Like I was just a backup account she could drain without notice. Like I wouldn't notice. But I did. And I wasn't the same person she used to dismiss with a smirk and a shrug. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not in confusion, but in the kind of clarity that feels cold in your chest. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't even flinch. I opened the voice recorder app on my phone, took a breath, and dialed her number. She answered with her usual frost. Oh. Look who's alive. Just checking in, I said, steady as glass. There was a long pause before her voice shifted into mockery. What now? Another imaginary crime to pin on me? I let the words hang in the air. I found some charges, I replied. Boutiques, retreats, all under my name. Curious, huh? She laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a smug one, a familiar one. You always fold, Phelan, she said. That's your thing. You discover something, panic, then let it go. You've never followed through in your life. She thought I was still her mark. I ended the call. No goodbye, no explanation, just one quiet tap on the red button and a saved recording. Oregon's one-party consent laws meant I didn't need her approval to use it. And for once, the law was on my side. I clipped the bank statement to a folder I'd already labeled restitution. I added the email, the call recording, and the file from the card issuer. I printed screenshots and labeled every page. I wasn't raging. I was building. I wasn't looking for an apology. I was assembling a case. That night, I stayed late at the office. The copier droned like a lullaby as I made 3 full sets of every document. 1 copy stayed in my desk, 1 in the safe at home. The 3rd went into my canvas tote bag, nestled next to an old notebook where I'd kept a business card for over a year. Juno McKay. She had spoken at a retirement seminar I helped organize. A sharp, composed attorney with a gift for saying terrifyingly true things in a calm voice. I remembered her words clear as day. Documentation beats drama. Every time. I found her card still tucked between the pages of that old notebook, called the number, and to my surprise, she picked up herself. We arranged to meet 2 days later at a quiet cafe downtown, just across from the Lane County Courthouse. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a sharp black blazer and a kind but no-nonsense expression. When I handed her the folder, she didn't open it right away. Instead, she asked, "Are you filing this to feel better or to make it stop?" "Both," I admitted, "but mostly to make it stop." She nodded once. "Then, we'll do it clean, quiet, legal, no spectacle, no family showdowns, just facts." That night, I sat on my bed with the folder still in my lap. I didn't daydream about confronting Phelan or making her grovel. I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration. I wanted to be left alone. I wanted to no longer carry the burden of her choices. And for once, I had the tools to do just that. By Friday morning, I was ready. No courtroom glamour, no dramatic music. I wore dark jeans, a simple blouse, and flats I'd owned for years. I looked like someone running errands. Because that's what this was now, an administrative errand to reclaim my name. I parked at the courthouse and sat in my car for a minute. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, but my heart was steady. She didn't need to confess. She already had. I had the tape. I had the receipts. I had a lawyer who believed in order over outrage, and most importantly, I had myself. Not the girl who folded, the woman who files. The loudest thing I ever did was show up with proof. That's what I kept reminding myself as I opened the email from Thora. Her subject line was vague. Something odd you might want to see, but the attachment said everything. A scan, misfiled into my records, slipped through by accident. A therapy worksheet. Isolde's name printed neatly at the top. I stared at the handwritten notes scrawled in the margins. Emotional leverage. Escalate guilt to maintain cooperation. Make her feel irreplaceable but responsible. Then one line, underlined twice. Phelan needs to believe she's the strong one. That's how I keep her giving. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a method. I hit print without hesitation. The paper fed out slowly, like it was processing the weight of the betrayal for me. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my growing folder labeled Character Evidence. No tears, no raised voice, just the quiet click of a drawer closing. That same afternoon, I drove to Rowena's under the pretense of picking up my old sewing machine. She greeted me in the usual way-soft smile, vague tension behind her eyes. I followed her into the kitchen, and she poured tea like nothing had ever happened. Like I hadn't been erased from family photos. Like I hadn't been burned, erased, and gaslit in her home. "You look tired," she said gently. "I've been thinking," I replied. "About court?" She blinked, then sipped. "Oh, Phelan, that's too far. She's your sister." "She used my name," I said flatly. "Opened accounts, lied. That's fraud." Rowena looked away, eyes lingering on the framed photo of the 3 of us from years ago, barely 20, trying to smile through Isolde's tight grip around my shoulders. "She only used your name once," Rowena said after a pause. "That I know of. She told me after it was done." I froze. "You knew?" My voice didn't rise, but the air around it cracked. She said she needed it, Rowena murmured. I thought you'd understand. That was worse than the lie, worse than the silence, that assumption that my kindness would stretch forever. I stood. The tea was untouched. I do understand, I said. That's why I'm filing. Rowena didn't stop me from leaving. I didn't slam the door, didn't say a word more. I walked out the same way I walked in, alone and fully awake. 2 hours later, I sat in Juno McKay's office. The folder lay open on her desk. She skimmed through each document slowly, eyebrows narrowing just slightly at the therapy note. When she reached the printout of the email thread, showing the unauthorized accounts, she stopped. This isn't just about money anymore, she said. This is documented emotional abuse. I nodded. I want this clean, I told her. Not theatrical. Just done. You've done your part, Juno replied. Now let the process handle the rest. As I sat across from her, I didn't feel small or vengeful. I felt right. I had spent so long trying not to become the problem, I hadn't realized how many problems it enabled by disappearing into myself. The silence they weaponized, I was repurposing it, turning it into data, testimony, evidence. Juno looked up, folding her hands. Are you ready to file the claim? I took a breath. Yes. No tremble, no pause. They used silence as protection. I'm about to use it as evidence. The courtroom gave me distance. But what I needed now was direction. I stood in front of my closet longer than necessary, staring at a row of clothes that suddenly felt like costumes. Eventually, I reached for the black suit I'd worn to Dad's funeral. Not because I was mourning anything, but because something was being buried today. The version of me that used silence as protection. The one who waited for someone else to call it abuse before she believed it herself. When I stepped onto the courthouse steps that Monday morning, I didn't feel small. I felt exact. Isolde arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a blouse that said brunch and heels that said this wasn't serious. She barely looked my way. She still thought this was a misunderstanding dressed up as melodrama. A phase. A bluff. She looked for Rowena. She wasn't here. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just sat beside Juno McKay, hands folded over the sealed binder in my lap. Everything we needed was inside scans, transcripts, signatures, timelines. My voice, captured in silence. As the judge entered, Isolde finally looked toward me. She didn't speak, but her eyes narrowed. Maybe she realized I hadn't brought emotion. I'd brought paperwork. Juno started by laying out the documentation in order. The unauthorized card accounts, the misused refund requests, the scanned receipts with forged initials. Then came the audio clip. I watched Isolde as it played. I watched her swallow hard when her own voice spilled from the speaker. You've never had the guts to fight me. You fold every time. She looked like someone who had just realized the match she struck lit the wrong side of the room. When it was my turn to speak, I stood. Not tall, just steady. I'm not here to prove a feeling, I said. I'm here to prove a pattern. This isn't personal hurt, it's documented theft. It's systemic manipulation. And it ends now. I didn't raise my voice. The facts were loud enough. The judge didn't need much time. Restraining order granted. Financial access revoked. All known accounts frozen pending further review. Mrs. Isolde Langley is prohibited from using the plaintiff's name in any legal, financial, or digital context effective immediately. Isolde tried to object. You had your chance to respond, the judge said firmly. Now she has her protection. When I walked out of the courtroom, I didn't feel victorious. I felt restored. Later that evening, I drove to Isolde's townhouse. No confrontation, no notes under windshields. I opened the mailbox and slipped in a small manila envelope. Inside was a color copy of the spa receipt, the forged signature. A single handwritten line. This is the last time you will ever use my name. I didn't wait to see if she'd find it. It wasn't about reaction. It was about record. At home, I passed by a photo of us on the hallway shelf last Christmas together. She was laughing. I was mid-blink. I pulled it from the frame and slid in a new card. It read, "Some sisters share blood. Others just share a surname. Temporarily." The courtroom gave me distance, but what I needed now was direction. For the first time in months, there were no emails from the bank. No blocked calls flashing across my phone screen. Just quiet. The kind of silence that didn't threaten to smother me, just held me still long enough to breathe. I sat at my kitchen table, sunlight crawling across the floor, and read the confirmation message from Juno. The protective order was finalized. My name legally shielded. Isolde was barred from accessing any financial, digital, or public platform using my identity. My name, once casually borrowed, was now legally mine again. I closed the laptop slowly, not out of relief, out of finality. There was nothing more to prove. An envelope sat on the counter, hand addressed in Rowena's careful handwriting. I hadn't opened it the day it arrived, but now I picked it up and peeled the flap without ceremony. "I don't know if I did right by either of you," the note read. "I just didn't want to lose both. No apology, no ownership, just fear." I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as the rest of the paperwork. Not in the trash butt, not in a frame either. Later that week, I joined a local community garden project. Nothing big, just a few raised beds, some retirees planting tomatoes, and the quiet kind of people who didn't ask too many questions. A woman next to me, maybe in her 50s, chatted about her siblings. Something about one of them going through her old mail and pretending it was a mistake. I didn't respond right away. Then I said, "It's possible to care about someone and still know they're not safe to keep close." She looked at me for a second longer than normal, then nodded. That was enough. As I walked home that afternoon, I passed a cafe where a woman poured tea into a white mug. The steam curled up just like it had that day. The memory flickered, sharp and instant, but it didn't sting anymore. Just an image, like old film left in the sun. It was never about the tea, it was the lifetime before it. A few blocks later, I found myself near the courthouse. The building looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe because I was no longer standing at its steps, waiting to be believed. Justice hadn't fixed the past. It just made sure I had a future. I sat on a bench nearby and pulled a small notepad from my bag. I'd been thinking about starting something, maybe a blog, maybe a letter I'd never send. The page was blank, but I already knew the title, "The Price of Being the Quiet One." I began writing in small, steady strokes, not for vengeance, not even for closure, just to tell it right. My last line was simple. They thought silence was weakness. Turns out it was storage. "Hi, I'm Carolyn. I used to think family meant safety, until mine burned my lottery check, called me a freeloader, and kicked me out into a snowstorm. They mocked my Christmas gift, then tried to take credit when it turned out I'd won $2.5 million. They didn't just laugh at me, they erased me. So tell me, how do you heal from a betrayal that wears your last name? Because what they did next was worse. Want to hear it?" I had barely stepped through the door when I knew I shouldn't have come. The smell of cinnamon and ham filled the house, but it was missing something. Or maybe I was the missing part. I kicked off my snow-covered boots at the mat, clutching the small paper bag like it held something sacred. My fingers were red from the cold, but no one offered me a towel. Or a hello. I could hear my mother's voice from the living room, mid-sentence, laughing. And she made it from scratch. The crust was just perfect. Blythe always had a hand for detail. Of course. I hovered for a moment in the hallway, waiting. Nothing. No one even looked up when I walked into the room. The fire crackled in the hearth, soft jazz floated from the speakers, and my seat, well, it wasn't set. Ginevra looked at me finally. "You're late." "I brought something," I said, trying to sound casual. I held up the bag. "Just something small." Blythe glanced up from her wineglass, smirking. "Don't tell me it's another one of your last-minute experiments." I ignored the sting. "Scratch-offs, one for each of you." Silence. Not even the kind that holds surprise, just that stale pause before mockery. You bought lottery tickets? Derek chuckled. What is this, white elephant for broke people? Blythe added, Did you find them in the clearance bin? Ginevra didn't even bother to unwrap hers. You know, you could have at least baked something. It's Christmas, not trash day. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it sliced just the same. I didn't say anything. I set the bag on the coffee table and sat on the edge of the sofa, hands in my lap, listening as they moved on to another conversation. Something about Blythe's new curtains. Something about Derek's fantasy football league. I looked around at the people I was supposed to belong to and felt like a guest no one had invited. Dinner passed without much fanfare. I helped clear the plates while they moved into the den for the annual family photo. I wiped gravy off the counter, rinsed wine glasses, arranged leftovers into mismatched Tupperware. It wasn't until I heard the chorus of "Say cheese" that I realized I hadn't been called. By the time I walked into the den, it was over. The camera was already back in its case. The lights were off. Blythe was texting. Ginevra was adjusting the throw pillows like nothing had happened. Later that night, I saw the photo on Blythe's social media. Everyone was smiling, arms around each other, framed by the tree and the stockings. The caption read, "The ones who matter most this Christmas." I didn't even feel shocked, just hollow. That's the thing no one tells you. Being forgotten doesn't hurt as much as realizing they remembered, and still didn't care. I sat in the upstairs room I always stayed in when I visited. Same faded quilt, same faint smell of cedar and dust. I didn't cry. I just watched the snow fall outside the window, wondering why I kept coming back. Maybe I thought this time would be different. Maybe I hoped they'd look at me and see more than the girl who dropped out of grad school and never got married. Maybe I thought giving them something, even if it was small, meant I could still matter. I opened my coat pocket and pulled out the last ticket. The one I had planned to scratch off with them, maybe laugh about, maybe win $5 on. I looked at it for a long while. Maybe this year, something small could go right. The room was so quiet, I could hear the baseboard heater ticking, a rhythmic little pop and snap like a metronome counting down the seconds of a life I wasn't really living. The overhead light buzzed faintly, but I'd turned it off hours ago. Only the lamp by the bed was still on, casting a soft yellow pool across the old comforter I hadn't changed since I got here. I held the ticket between my fingers, gently, like it was made of tissue or ash. I stared at it, like it might vanish if I blinked too hard. I didn't feel excited, I didn't feel scared. Mostly, I just felt still, like every emotion had been wrung out of me days ago, and I was just waiting to be filled back up with something that wasn't exhaustion. Downstairs, I heard the unmistakable sounds of dessert being enjoyed. Silverware tapping against plates, someone setting down a wine glass too firmly on the table, Blythe's laugh, high, polished, brittle, and Derek's voice rumbling beneath it like a bass note. They were probably talking about granite countertops again, or maybe the ski trip they were planning for January. Aspen or Tahoe, they hadn't decided. Their problems were the kind people liked having. None of it involved me. It never did. Nothing I said ever seemed to reach them. Not in any real way. My stories were nice, my jobs, interesting, my opinions, different. A lifetime of soft put-downs disguised as politeness. And when I gave gifts, they were smiled at and set aside. Not once had anyone ever asked what I liked, or what I wanted for a change. Being around them always made me feel like an extra in a movie they were starring in, necessary to fill a scene, but never part of the actual script. I ran my thumb along the edge of the ticket again. The cardboard had gone warm and pliant, like it had absorbed my hesitation. A weird, quiet intimacy. I reached for the old dime I kept tucked in my wallet, a habit I picked up years ago, back when I'd count out coins in the grocery store aisle, hoping I'd have enough. It was smooth and worn, the face of Roosevelt barely visible anymore. I lined it up against the first square and scratched carefully, deliberately, like I was peeling paint off a wall. The first row, one matching digit. The second, another. My chest tightened. Then I scratched the third. I froze. 3 identical numbers in a row. My fingers hesitated, just for a second. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining it, that I was misreading the symbols, that this was some mistake. But I wasn't blinking. I was wide awake. I scratched the 4th row, and then the 5th. A pattern was forming. Perfect, clean, impossible. I reached for my phone and opened the lottery site, my heart thudding now in a slow, steady beat that felt out of sync with everything else. I typed in the numbers on the back of the card, double-checked, and hit verify. The screen blinked once. Then the number appeared, clear and irrefutable. $25,000. No bells. No whistles. Just a number and a blinking green checkmark, as matter of fact as a weather report. I didn't scream. I didn't leap up. I didn't cry. I sat there, holding the phone in one hand, the ticket in the other, while the heater clicked behind me. The shock didn't hit like lightning. It moved slow, like ice spreading through warm water. A quiet kind of realization that settled into my bones. My first thought wasn't joy. It wasn't even relief. It was, they can't know? Not yet. Not because I wanted to hoard it, or because I was trying to lie, but because I knew what would happen if I said anything. Blythe would laugh at first, pretending it was funny. Then she'd ask questions that weren't really questions. Where did you buy it? Wasn't that the grocery we all go to? Didn't you use Mom's car that day? Wasn't it Christmas Eve, our family celebration? Then Derek would step in, smooth and reasonable, turning facts into favors. You were staying in our guest room, eating at our table, using our electricity. The implication would be there, thinly veiled. It's not just your win. It's shared. They'd wear me down, wrap it all up in guilt and expectation. I'd come out the other side with a slice of something that had been wholly mine, reduced to crumbs. They wouldn't even realize they were doing it. Or maybe they would. I honestly didn't know which was worse. I stood up and crossed the room to the dresser. The mirror above it was cloudy, the glass old, the frame chipped. I looked at my reflection. My face looked the same, but nothing else was. My life had just split in two, the one I'd been stuck inside and the one I could now walk into. I set the ticket on the bed, smoothing it flat. Then I opened the drawer and pulled out my notebook, the one I wrote in when I needed to make sense of things. I flipped past pages of notes that no longer mattered, shopping lists, reminders to call insurance, a recipe for lentil soup I never tried. On a clean page, I wrote, Montana State Lottery Office Address. Look up, verify twice. Bus 14 departs 9:10 a.m. Arrives Helena 1:45 p.m. Bring ID, routing plus account number, signed ticket. Do not tell anyone. My handwriting looked calm. Neat, almost detached, like I was planning a trip to the grocery store, not preparing to rewrite my entire future. But inside, something had shifted. It wasn't joy, not yet. It wasn't even freedom. But it was the absence of dread. And that felt new. I slid the ticket into the pages of an old paperback. The shipping news, I think. Something no one in this house would bother to open. Then I placed the book deep inside my canvas tote, zipped it shut, and covered it with a rolled sweater and a pair of socks. The heater clicked off again. Silence returned, clean and cold. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. Don't forget to do the dishes before bed. No, thank you for the scarf I spent 3 evenings knitting. No, it was nice to see you. Just another directive, another duty, just like always. I looked down at the screen, then back up at the mirror. I saw the same tired face they always said looked ungrateful, the same mouth they said talked back, the same eyes they never really looked into when I spoke. But something had changed. They had no idea, and I wasn't going to tell them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The next morning, I woke early. Not because I had anything to look forward to, but because the smell of bacon and burnt toast wafted through the vents, dragging me out of a shallow sleep. I dressed slowly, pulled my hair back into a loose knot, and headed down to the kitchen like I always did, quietly, like a guest who'd overstayed. They were already seated. Ginevra at the head, as always, reading from her phone while Blythe scrolled through hers. Derek was slouched in his chair, chewing loudly, and Howard, well, he was stirring his coffee like it was a task he resented. No one looked up when I entered. I poured myself some black coffee and stood for a moment, holding the mug between my hands, letting the heat settle into my fingers. Ginevra glanced up finally. "Hope you washed your hands before touching anything." I didn't respond. I sat down at the far end of the table, furthest from the window, and began buttering a piece of dry toast. They continued chatting like I wasn't there. "Have you heard about that lottery thing?" Ginevra said suddenly, scrolling. "Somebody in Missoula won $2.5 million off a scratch-off. Christmas miracle, I guess." Derek snorted. "Wouldn't that be a hell of a twist? Imagine if it was someone like Carolyn." Blythe laughed, flipping her hair. "She did bring us those charming little charity cards." I kept eating. Ginevra looked directly at me. "You still have yours, don't you?" I set my fork down slowly, met her gaze. "Yes." The table went silent, just for a second, but long enough. "That's not funny," Blythe said, but her tone shifted. She was listening now. Derek leaned in. "Wait, you actually still have it?" I gave a small shrug. "I do." That silence stretched again, sharp, intrusive. Ginevra folded her hands. "Well, if it turns out you're holding the winner, I think we all know what that means." I tilted my head. "What does it mean?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It means we share. You didn't get that ticket on your own. You came here for Christmas. You stayed in our home, ate our food, used our water, our heat. I mean, that ticket was part of a gift exchange. It belongs to everyone." "Yeah," Blythe jumped in. "It was like a group thing, part of the family celebration." I stared down at my toast. "I didn't see it that way." Derek chimed in. "I've got a truck payment behind 3 months, and the roof's leaking at Mom's. So, if it is the winner, don't start acting brand new." I set my mug down carefully. "I haven't claimed anything. I just said I still have it." Ginevra leaned forward. "Don't play coy. You need to remember who's always been here. We've put up with a lot, Carolyn. You've lived off this family for years. I haven't lived here in over a decade. You always come back when it suits you. You take. You never give. Even now, you're sitting on something, and you think you don't owe us a piece?" I stood up slowly. "I don't owe you anything." Ginevra stood too. "If you think you're going to take what belongs to this family and walk away, you've got another thing coming." I didn't yell. I didn't break. I simply walked out of the kitchen. Upstairs, I locked the door to my room. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. Just adrenaline. I sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled hard, staring at the crack in the wall I'd always hated as a kid. I whispered it aloud, just to hear it. This is why I didn't tell them. The ticket was still in my bag, untouched since last night. I didn't even pull it out to double-check. I didn't need to. I knew now that nothing had changed. Not really. Money didn't make me valuable. It just made me a threat. Later that evening, just after the sun dropped behind the frozen ridge, a knock came at my door. I stayed still. After a pause, Ginevra's voice cut through. "You don't have to say anything. Just bring the check down when it arrives. Let's not make this messy." I didn't respond. I didn't move. Instead, I stood slowly, walked to the door, and slid the deadbolt into place. The next day passed in a strange fog. I kept to myself, stayed out of the kitchen, and only came downstairs to refill my thermos with coffee. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel, or worse, beg for space that should have always been mine. By late afternoon, I took my tote and walked to the library. Not to read. Just to sit where nobody expected anything from me. I found a table by the window, opened a random book, and let the silence breathe around me. It was there, in the stale hum of fluorescent lights and muffled page turning, that my phone buzzed with a message from Ginevra. Dinner tonight, just family. Let's start fresh. 7 p.m. That was it. No, how are you? No apology for the things she'd said, or how she'd tried to wrap entitlement in a lecture about sacrifice. Just a calendar invitation to perform forgiveness. I stared at the message, deleted it, then scrolled back and read it again. I didn't say yes. I just showed up. It was already dark when I walked in. The house had been scrubbed of tension, at least on the surface. Table set like a magazine spread. Candles. Napkins folded like some hotel wedding rehearsal. I knew better than to believe it was for me. Ginevra stood in the kitchen, apron on, holding a roast chicken like it was an offering. Her smile looked tight. "I'm glad you came," she said. Blythe turned from the hallway. "We even saved your seat this time." Her voice was too high, too rehearsed. I nodded, took off my coat, and hung it by the door. I didn't bother asking what the occasion was. I already knew it wasn't about reconciliation. It was about optics. We sat. Forks scraped plates. Conversations tiptoed around anything real. "I've been thinking," Ginevra said, slicing into the pie she'd brought from the bakery. "We've all said things that didn't come out right. But we're still a family, right?" No one responded. She laid a slice of apple pie in front of me. Then, just as my fork touched the edge of the crust, she reached into a drawer and pulled out a tan envelope. She slid it next to my plate like it was a napkin. "Just a little something to make things clear. It's cleaner for taxes this way." I didn't open it. "Just take a look when you're ready," she added. "Nothing dramatic, just fairness." I pushed the envelope aside, still untouched. Then I looked her in the eye. "Fairness?" She blinked. "Well, yes. It just outlines how we could divide things. You know, so nobody feels left out. You're not planning to run off with everything, are you?" Blythe chimed in, swirling her wine. "It's not about taking. It's about sharing. We've always done things together." Derek finally spoke. "It's not that we don't trust you, but it would be crazy not to set expectations now, before anything official happens." I didn't answer. I stood up, pushed the plate back toward the center of the table, untouched. "I'm not hungry." "Carolyn," Ginevra started, "don't be childish. You always do this. You get all worked up." "No," I said, steady. "You always do this. You decorate guilt and call it family." They stared at me like I'd spoken another language. I didn't wait for a reply. I walked out the front door, coat unzipped, the cold slicing through my sleeves. I didn't care. I needed air that didn't feel choreographed. As I reached the edge of the driveway, I pulled out my phone and texted Selby. "I'm ready to move forward." She responded within seconds. "Then let's do it." Back inside that house, I imagined Ginevra shaking her head, muttering something about me being too proud, too sensitive, too selfish. Maybe she even said it out loud. She thinks she's above family now. No, I just stopped lowering myself to be part of one that never included me. By the time the first soft launch night came around, the paint on the walls of Carolyn's table had barely dried. The sign outside still smelled like pine from the carpenter's truck. We kept the lights dim, the playlist low, and the front door unlocked, just enough to let in curiosity, but not enough to announce anything bold. I stood behind the espresso counter, wiping down the machine, even though it didn't need it. Selby was sorting through the reservation cards. I'd asked her to keep it all quiet. No press, no fanfare. Let the food do the talking. "Tonight's mostly neighborhood people and 2 invitees from the community board," she said without looking up. I nodded. "Let's just observe. No introductions. Let them guess." The door chimed around 6:40. 2 women I vaguely recognized from a city cleanup event stepped in. Then a retired teacher who once failed me in 11th grade. They smiled, took their seats, admired the old brick walls like they hadn't always been here, hidden behind decades of drywall and dust. Then they arrived. I didn't see them at first, just heard the voice. Ginevra's. Loud enough to be polite, just enough edge to command space. "Oh, how charming," she said, walking in behind a woman from the Rotary Club. "It's small, but I suppose cozy is the trend now." Blythe followed close behind, glancing around with that uptight smirk she saved for estate sales and bad furniture stores. Derek trailed behind, hands shoved in his coat pockets like he'd rather be anywhere else. They didn't see me. Ginevra leaned toward the hostess stand. "We're with the council invite. She said we'd be fine to join." Selby glanced at me, then back at them. "Of course. We have a table for 3 near the window." Ginevra chuckled. "Imagine if that freeloader of a daughter ended up in a place like this. Wouldn't that be something?" I didn't flinch. Just kept steaming milk for a cappuccino like I'd done it 1,000 times. Because I had. Not in some glamorous barista course, but through trial, error, and YouTube tutorials with bad lighting. This wasn't magic. It was muscle memory. The room filled gradually. Quiet conversations hummed. Laughter bounced off the ceiling beams. I stayed behind the counter, letting the night carry itself. Then the mayor walked in. He didn't need to be here, but he showed up anyway, smiling like he meant it. He crossed the room, nodding at patrons, and made a straight line for me. "Carolyn," he said, shaking my hand. "Congratulations again. This place has your fingerprints all over it." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Every fork paused midair. Ginevra turned, as if someone had slapped her with a warm towel. Blythe's wine glass trembled just enough to spill a drop onto the linen napkin. I stepped around the counter, smoothing my apron. "Welcome," I said to the mayor, then glanced at the 3 of them. "Table for 3?" Ginevra didn't answer. Derek looked at the floor. Blythe cleared her throat. "We didn't realize this was yours," Ginevra said finally, blinking like someone trying to focus in the dark. I smiled, not cruelly, just enough to let her know I'd seen everything I needed to. "Well, now you do," I said. "Enjoy your evening." I turned to walk away, but Ginevra reached out, fingers curling slightly toward my arm. "Carolyn, maybe we could talk sometime. About... maybe you're hiring?" I looked at her, then at Blythe, who was suddenly very interested in the breadbasket. "All applicants go through the same process," I said evenly. "If you'd like to apply, Selby handles HR. We don't do shortcuts, even for family." Blythe scoffed, her voice low but audible. "Seriously? You'd make us apply like strangers?" "No," I said, meeting her gaze. "Like adults." Selby approached then, folder in hand, and gently redirected them to their table. The night moved on. Dishes were cleared. Dessert was served. They ate, because they were too proud not to, but they didn't stay for coffee. After the last guest left, I sat at the front window with a mug in hand, staring out at the empty streetlights flickering over snow. My phone buzzed. A friend of Selby's had written a blog post. "New cafe in Missoula is run by a quietly brilliant woman with a sharp edge and a soft center." I whispered to myself, just to feel the words out loud. I've waited my whole life for someone to see both. The night after the cafe's soft launch, I didn't go home. I stayed at Selby's, slept on her pull-out couch with a blanket that smelled like lavender and strong detergent. In the morning, she handed me coffee in a chipped mug and asked if I was ready for the final prep inspection. I said yes, but something tugged at me. I needed to grab my tax documents, still tucked away in my old bedroom. It was early January. The sidewalks were still crusted with half-melted ice, the sky that colorless gray that makes you question if the sun ever really existed here. By the time I got to the house, the windows were dark, but the porch light was on. It looked exactly the same and nothing like home. I stepped inside without knocking. It was quiet, the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, just empty. I slipped off my boots, walked toward the kitchen, and stopped cold. The usual pile of mail wasn't on the counter. Ginevra sat at the table alone, a nearly empty mug in front of her, steam long gone. She didn't look up, but the faint scent of something acrid hit me. Burnt paper, like the edge of a candle wick snuffed out too late. I dropped my bag on the floor. Did anything come from the lottery office? She finally looked at me. Her lips twitched, just slightly, like she had rehearsed what she'd say. You mean this? She reached beside her and held up a corner of scorched cardstock. The check, blackened on one side, curling at the edges. I took care of it. My jaw clenched. You burned it? That money was never going to do anything good for this family, she said, like she was explaining a casserole recipe gone wrong. It would have changed things, destroyed what little we still have. Blythe's voice floated from the top of the stairs. We don't need your dirty millions, Carolyn. You think money makes you better than us now? I didn't answer. I walked further into the kitchen. Derek came in from the back door, snow still on his shoulders. You live here. You eat here. You act like a queen walking through a castle you didn't build. I stared at Ginevra. You stole from me. She stood up, slow, deliberate. You walked into this house. That makes everything in it ours. You want to leave with your check? Fine. But you don't take this family's name and pretend you earned something on your own. There was no fire in her voice, just that dead certainty she always used when she decided she was right. I turned without a word, walked to my room, and closed the door behind me. The walls hadn't changed, still had the thumbtack holes from posters I'd taken down years ago. I grabbed a duffel from the closet and stuffed what I could into it. Some jeans, toiletries, that worn sweater I kept meaning to replace. As I zipped the bag, footsteps stopped outside my door. Ginevra's voice came through like a snake under a doorframe. If you walk out now, don't think you can come crawling back. I opened the door slowly. That's the first thing you've said that I agree with. We locked eyes. Hers didn't soften. I brushed past her, walked through the hall like I'd walked it my whole life. Only this time, I didn't look back. Outside, the cold bit harder than I expected. I hadn't taken a coat, just a scarf and thin gloves. My car had been parked blocks away, still with a dead battery. So I walked. Half a mile in, my fingers stopped burning. That's when you know you're in trouble. Not when you feel pain, but when you stop feeling anything at all. A porch light flicked on as I passed a neighbor's home. Mrs. Whitmore. She had always left cookies on our doorstep when I was a kid. She opened her door halfway and called out, "You okay, honey?" I managed a small nod, though I doubt it convinced her. She stepped out in slippers. "You look like you've been out there too long. Come on in, warm up. Do you need a phone?" "I have mine," I said, voice hoarse. Could I borrow a charger?" She smiled softly and held the door open wider. I sat inside her mudroom while the phone charged on a small side table. The warmth crept back into my skin slowly, pins and needles lighting up my palms. When the screen lit up, a new message appeared. Selby. Tomorrow's inspection is early. We ready? I typed back without hesitating. Let's make this place real. I'd lost the check, but I hadn't lost my name. 3 weeks passed quietly. Quiet in the way a storm sometimes is when it's building just beneath the surface. Carolyn's table had started picking up steam. A blogger from Spokane called it the kind of place that feels like it was made for you, even if no one ever made room before. Customers lingered. Staff smiled more. There was, for the first time in a long while, air in my lungs that didn't feel borrowed. Then the noise started. Selby caught it first. She walked in mid-morning, phone in hand, her brows pressed together. "There's a thread in a local Facebook group, a long one." I looked up from the order forms. "And?" "It's about you and the cafe." I reached for her phone and scrolled. Accusations, anonymous comments, rumors. She pushed her family aside to play entrepreneur. Heard she used money that wasn't even hers. Ask her who really helped her get this place off the ground. Near the bottom. Trust me, I know her. I'm related. That one hit differently. By the end of the day, 2 bookings had canceled. A supplier asked to confirm our licensing again. One of the staff mentioned getting DMs from someone named Marcy Bell, warning them not to trust the boss lady too much. The name didn't hit me right away. That evening, Selby and I stayed late to review system logs. Bookings had been tampered with, duplicate entries, emails rerouted, vendor contacts suddenly disconnected. We pulled the admin access report. The IP address was from inside the cafe. Same terminal used by Blythe's workstation. Blythe. She had applied under the name Marcy Bell just after we announced our open hiring event. She'd submitted a resume from a Gmail address I didn't recognize, listed references I never bothered to check. She worked quietly, never late, never too eager. I'd taken it as humility, but now I saw it for what it was: camouflage. "Call her in," I told Selby. 10 minutes later, Blythe sat across from me in the back office, her arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You've been working here under a fake name," I said. "That's not illegal," she replied. "It is when you use it to alter business records." Her face twitched, but she held her ground. "I didn't alter anything. I was helping. You were drowning and didn't even know it. I figured you'd thank me." By sabotaging reservations? By sending messages to my staff accusing me of stealing? "I didn't. I have logs, Blythe. Screenshots. Server access trails. Every login." She said nothing. I leaned forward. "You didn't just lie. You walked into my life like a thief. You used my name to smear me. And for what? So I'd hand you a piece of something I built?" She blinked rapidly. "We're family, Carolyn." "No, we're history." I walked out of the office and called a staff meeting. The team gathered in the front, confusion turning to quiet fury as I showed them the evidence: emails, logs, even a recorded message Blythe had sent to a vendor, claiming I had mental issues and was not fit to run anything. She stood at the edge of the room, silent now, shrinking. "I need everyone to know," I said, voice steady. "This business is built on honesty, and this betrayal doesn't reflect on any of you. But it won't be ignored." Selby handed her a formal notice of termination. Blythe didn't say a word, just took the envelope and walked out through the back door. That night, a message pinged on my phone. "Ginevra, you always were dramatic." I deleted it before finishing the sentence. The next morning, Selby dropped a folder on my desk as I reviewed the new hiring budget. It was thick, tabbed with highlighter notes. "Payroll audit," she said. "Started it last week just in case." I flipped the folder open. Her finger tapped one name on the list: a part-time kitchen staffer, someone we'd hired through Blythe's recommendation. "There's a discrepancy. Hours billed don't match shift logs. Cash payouts through side jobs that don't exist. Looks like the sabotage didn't end with her." I stared at the page. "I think they were testing how far they could go," Selby said. "Looks like they were planning something bigger." I nodded slowly. "Let's make sure whatever they started ends here." I spent the next 2 hours combing through every line in the payroll folder Selby handed me. She sat across the desk, legs crossed, tapping a pen against her knee in slow, even rhythm. The name that kept popping up didn't ring any bells, not until I checked the emergency contact listed on the new hire forms. A burner phone number tied to an address in Blythe's neighborhood. Of course. The person Blythe vouched for, the one padding hours and slipping cash through fake shift logs, wasn't just a mistake. It was a setup. One meant to bleed the business dry before I had a chance to fully stand on my own feet. "Security footage?" I asked. Selby nodded. "Already pulled." We walked to the back room, the one that doubled as storage and our tiny server space. She queued up the feed from last Thursday. At first, it was just routine: me unlocking the register, staff prepping, delivery drop-offs. Then, around 8:42 p.m., Blythe, who had been officially terminated a week prior, walked in through the service entrance. She knew the keypad code. She walked straight to the safe, keyed it open like she owned the place, pulled out what looked like a stack of 20s, and tucked them into a to-go bag she'd brought with her. No flinching, no hesitation, just calm, calculated theft. I didn't say anything. Selby stopped the video. We can report this. We should. I nodded once. Call the police. There was no dramatic music, no shouting match, no slamming doors. Just the quiet resolve that comes when you know you're finally done handing out warnings. By lunchtime, the officers arrived. They didn't come in with flashing lights or raised voices. They came in plain clothes, walked directly to the table where Blythe was now seated, somehow back in the cafe again, like a ghost that refused to stay gone. She didn't resist, just blinked slowly, face flushed as they read her the charges. Fraud, trespassing, theft. I didn't do anything, she said, voice wavering. This is a mistake. She's lying. I stepped forward, calm. I have the login records, surveillance footage, the tampered invoices, and the name you used to hire a fake employee. One of the officers glanced at me. That'll be enough. As they walked her past the tables, one of the regulars turned his head. That your sister? He whispered. No, I said. That's someone I used to know. Blythe's eyes welled up. Carolyn, please, don't let them do this. I didn't move. Save it for the judge. Later that afternoon, I sat back in my office, door closed, blinds drawn halfway. Selby came in with 2 cups of coffee and handed me one like we were in a silent ritual. My phone buzzed. Ginevra. I didn't open the message. I just read the preview. How could you do this to your own blood? I laughed quietly. Not bitter, just tired. Then I called her. She picked up immediately. So now you're too good for the rest of us? No, I said. I just stopped pretending you were any good for me. She went quiet. I didn't do anything to Blythe, I continued. She did it to herself. I'm not the villain here. I just stopped covering for the ones who are. You're still a part of this family, whether you like it or not, she snapped. No, I was never part of this family. I was the help, the placeholder, the shadow you blamed when the mirror cracked. I ended the call before she could respond. That evening, as the cafe closed for the night, I lingered in my office, lights low, a chair pulled toward the window. The space felt bigger without her in it. Lighter. A voicemail landed a few minutes after close. A reporter. Miss Rowan, we're running a piece on small business resilience. We'd love your insight, especially with your story. I let it play to the end, then replayed it again. This time, listening not to the words, but to the weight of them. Resilience. They always use that word like it's a compliment. But sometimes it just means you were the only one left standing because everyone else stepped on you. I whispered to the dark, this isn't about being tough. It's about surviving what should have never happened. The issue with being called resilient is that people say it like it's praise, when what they really mean is, you survived things we wouldn't have. There was a photo of me in the local magazine that ran the feature. I was holding a cup of coffee, smiling, though I don't remember actually smiling. The caption read, Strength isn't always loud. I tore out the page and tucked it in a drawer. Not to frame, not to share, just to keep. A reminder, maybe, that sometimes the quiet ones write the ending too. That afternoon, I let the crew go early. The cafe had run smoothly all week, and the Friday air had turned warm enough to leave the door open without a draft. Selby gave me a wink on her way out. You earned this lull. It was close to 5 when the phone rang. The landline. Almost nobody used it. I picked up on the second ring. Carolyn! Ginevra's voice cracked like it was stitched together from cigarettes and shame. I didn't answer. I don't know what else to say, she went on. She's gone. Derek moved. I haven't heard from him in weeks. People keep asking me questions I don't have answers to. There was a pause, just long enough for her to be hoping I'd break the silence. Just call me if you want to talk, she added. Or don't. I tried. The line went dead. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel pity either. I just felt still, like I had finally stepped out of a shadow I didn't know had been over me for decades. That night, the staff stayed late to clean and restock. I offered to handle it, but they wouldn't let me. Selby dragged out a small chocolate cake from the back fridge, the cheap kind with the plastic lid and airbrushed lettering that read, "We see you." It wasn't fancy, but it knocked the air out of me in a way no betrayal ever had. Not out of pain, out of recognition. "We figured it's time someone celebrated you," Selby said, placing one hand on my shoulder. I didn't cry. I laughed. Then I bit into the cake with the plastic fork they handed me, sitting cross-legged on the tile floor between two crates of paper cups. "I'm not invisible here," I said. "Never were," one of the kitchen girls replied. When they finally left and the lights dimmed, I stepped outside. The wind was soft for once, brushing against my face like it didn't mean to hurt me. I walked a block down to the edge of the trees, the same spot I'd stood when I left my mother's house all those weeks ago. I closed my eyes and whispered it into the quiet. "You burned the check, but I kept my name. That was always mine." I breathed in deep. No one else was around, no one to hear it but me. And that was enough. I wasn't angry. I just didn't owe her my silence anymore, or my return. Some things you don't fix. Some things aren't supposed to be mended. They're meant to be left behind, the way you leave a pair of shoes that never quite fit right, no matter how much you tried to stretch them. Back at the cafe, the voicemail light on the machine blinked. A reporter I hadn't met before. "Ms. Rowan, we'd love to include you in a piece about women business owners who've overcome personal hardship. You've become a symbol of resilience in the community. Would you be willing to talk?" I let the message play twice. Then a third time. Resilience. Again with that word. I sat down at the counter, turned off the lights, and stared into the streetlight glow dancing on the polished floor. "This isn't about resilience," I whispered, barely moving my lips. "It's about survival, and finally choosing myself." I didn't return the call. I didn't need to, because for once in my life, I wasn't proving anything. I was just living. "Hi, my name's Miyuki. When I was 9, my parents told me I had to go live with my aunt, just until things got less crowded. But they never came back for me. They raised their real kids in the house I thought I'd grow up in. And now that I've built a life of my own, they're suddenly proud. They want my money, my name, my story. But how do you forgive people who only remember you once you're valuable again? And what happens when they show up at your award ceremony, smiling for the cameras like they never left? Let me tell you what really happened. I still remember the color of the sky that day. It was the kind of overcast you don't forget. That sticky gray that makes the air feel heavy, like it knows something's about to change. I was 9. The suitcase was too big for me, and I couldn't lift it by myself. My mother didn't offer to help. She just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her lips pressed into that thin, familiar line that always came right before she said something that would stick to my bones for years. "They need the space more than you right now, Miyuki. It's not permanent." I nodded. I didn't cry. I didn't ask who they were, though I knew. I'd heard the whispers, the closed-door conversations, the way she smiled when Romilly walked into the room, but barely looked up when it was me. I understood what wasn't being said. Dad didn't say a word either. He stood behind her like a coat rack, tall and still and utterly useless. I glanced at him once, hoping for a flicker of doubt in his eyes, something that said this wasn't right. But he wouldn't look at me. Aunt Leona's car was waiting in the driveway. The engine was running. I climbed into the back seat with my stuffed cat clutched to my chest and the seatbelt digging into my collarbone. As we pulled away, I kept my eyes on the side mirror. No one waved. At Leona's place, the rain had started to fall in thin, cold needles. She lived in a modest duplex, tight hallways, stained carpet, mismatched furniture that had been good enough since 1978. She tried to smile, told me I could take the extra room, but that room turned out to be a walk-in closet with a mattress on the floor and a single lamp flickering like it was holding its breath. That first night, I didn't unpack. I lay there waiting, telling myself maybe this was just a misunderstanding. Maybe in the morning, Mom would call and say, "Come home." But the morning came and went. So did the next, and the one after that. By the second week, Leona sat me down at the tiny kitchen table. her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of gas station coffee. She didn't look at me when she said it. "I don't think they're coming back, honey." I didn't say anything. I just nodded like I already knew. I adjusted quickly because I had to. I learned which buses to take to get to school. I learned how to heat canned soup without burning it. I learned that waiting for someone to come back who never planned to hurts in a quiet, humiliating way. It doesn't make you cry. It makes you feel like you should have known better. Years passed in that same closet room. I studied hard. I worked part-time through high school, cash register, tutoring, late shifts at a laundromat. Leona did what she could, which mostly meant giving me space and occasionally leaving a plate of food outside my door. By the time I turned 18, I had built something resembling a life. That spring, I got my acceptance letter to NYU. It came in a big white envelope, thicker than the others. I opened it at the kitchen counter, my fingers trembling even though I knew what it was. I held it in my hands like proof that I wasn't what they made me feel like. Excess, leftover, inconvenient. Later that night, I took a photo of the letter and texted it to my mother. I thought maybe this was the thing that would make her respond. Not with money. I wasn't naive. But maybe a sentence, a word, some sort of acknowledgement. I waited, checked my phone before bed. Again the next morning. Nothing. No, I'm proud of you. No, good job. Not even a thumbs up. It's strange how silence can be so loud. It filled the room, seeped into my clothes, clung to the corners of the window like frost. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed, still the same mattress on the closet floor, and realized something that would take years to admit out loud. It took her 5 seconds to delete my name from her world. It took me 10 years to delete hers. The invitation never came, but that didn't stop me from dressing up. Romilly was turning 16, sweet 16, the kind where everything was pink, rented, and ridiculous. I hadn't been included in anything for years, but a cousin had let it slip during a Sunday school drop-off that there was going to be a party. Big. Catered. All family invited. So I figured maybe, just maybe, they'd forgotten to send mine. It was late afternoon when I arrived. The gated driveway loomed in front of me, iron bars polished like they were trying to impress someone. I stood there holding a gift bag with a ribbon I'd ironed flat that morning. Inside was a bracelet I'd saved up for at the pharmacy, a delicate chain with fake pearls, still taped inside the clear plastic box. The kind of gift a little sister gives when she wants to feel included. There was a security guard at the entrance with a clipboard and a Bluetooth headset. "Name?" he asked, not unkindly. "Miyuki Brandt," I replied, adjusting the strap on my second-hand dress. He scanned the list, flipped the page, flipped it back. "Sorry, you're not on the guest list." I blinked. My voice cracked when I tried to smile. "Maybe it was a mistake. She's my sister." He didn't move. "Can't let you in, ma'am. Orders are clear. No entry without your name here." I stepped back, nodding like I understood. Behind him, I saw them. Through the slats of the gate, Romilly in a satin gown, laughing with a group of girls. My mother, hair curled, holding a glass of champagne. And then, she turned. She saw me. Our eyes locked for 1 second, maybe 2. Then she looked away. No shock, no guilt. She just turned back to the conversation. The gift bag suddenly felt heavy in my hand. I walked a few feet to the curb and sat down. I stayed there for almost 3 hours, the concrete burning through the back of my dress as the sun slipped behind the house. Cars came and went. Music thumped from behind the gate. I could hear her voice, Romilly's, yelling over the beat about some gift she'd opened. It wasn't mine. I thought about knocking. I thought about screaming. But instead, I waited for a text. Nothing came. By the time the moon showed up, the shadows from the oak trees had stretched across the pavement like they were trying to reach me. My legs were stiff. My pride was gone. But my mind was sharper than ever. People like to tell you that family is everything, that no matter how bad things get, blood sticks. But sometimes, blood stains. And nobody wants to claim the mess. The next morning, after a silent ride home with Leona, I sat in the kitchen, still clutching the unopened gift bag. The plastic bracelet had fogged up in its packaging from the temperature change. Leona poured me some orange juice and sat across from me. "Maybe your mom didn't forget," she said softly, not looking at me. "Maybe she just didn't want to be reminded." I didn't ask her what that meant. I already knew. From that day on, I started building a new rule in my head. A kind of armor. When people disappear long enough, you start inventing reasons for them. Not because you believe them, but because it hurts less than the truth. I wasn't mad. I wasn't sad anymore either. I was tired of standing at gates that would never open. Later that night, after I'd changed into my pajamas and tucked the bracelet away in a shoebox beneath my bed, Leona knocked gently on the doorframe of my closet room. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, not turning around. "I'm used to it." She sighed. "You shouldn't have to be." I didn't answer. The next day at school, someone asked me how the party was. I said I didn't go because I had other plans. They nodded like they understood. But they didn't. Only I knew what it felt like to be shut out by people who shared your face, but not your heart. Only I knew what it felt like to be outside the gate, with a gift no one ever opened. I didn't talk about the party after that. Not to Leona, not to anyone at school, not even to myself. I boxed it up in the back of my mind the same way I tucked the unopened gift into the bottom drawer beneath my sweaters. Out of sight, out of reach. It was midwinter a few years later, during a rare afternoon off from school, when I decided to help Leona reorganize the hallway closet. She'd been nagging me about it for weeks, and truthfully, I needed the distraction. We were pulling out old board games and boxes of tax files when I came across a dusty photo album wedged behind a stack of National Geographics. The cover was torn at the spine, corners fraying like it had been handled 100 times, and loved by none. I opened it without thinking, flipping past the first few pages. Baby photos of Romilly, vacations in Myrtle Beach, Mom and Dad smiling like nothing in the world had ever hurt them. Then came the birthdays, Christmases, 4th of July cookouts, all lined up in glossy snapshots, and not a single one included me. Not one. Even in the group shots, I was absent. There was a Christmas photo from what I knew was the year I'd been sent away. I remembered being in that room. Leona had taken me to drop off a card and some cookies at the house, but in the picture, it was as if I'd never existed. The back of the photo had names scrawled in my mother's handwriting. My name had been written, then scratched out. I stared at that pen mark for longer than I should have. It wasn't bold or angry, just deliberate. And that made it worse. When you're young, you think being forgotten is the worst thing. But being deliberately removed? That cuts deeper. It means someone made a choice. I closed the album and didn't mention it to Leona. I didn't want her pity. I'd grown past wanting anyone to feel bad on my behalf. Later that night, I went back to my closet room. Same mattress on the floor. Same lamp Leona had replaced last summer when the old one fizzled out. She'd never said anything about it, just swapped it quietly, like she always did. It was her way of showing care. Upgrades without explanation. I sat down on the edge of the mattress, tugged the sleeves of my sweatshirt over my hands, and pulled out my headphones. Music was my escape back then. Cheap headphones, old tracks downloaded off sketchy sites. It didn't matter. It worked. As I laid back against the wall, I glanced at the ceiling and thought, not for the first time, so this is it. The closet had stopped being temporary a long time ago. It had become mine by default. Nobody had called in years. Not for holidays, not for birthdays. Not even when I made the honor roll. But sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder if she would even recognize my voice now. Would she answer if I called and said nothing? Would she know it was me? I never found out. I stopped calling after the third unanswered message when I was 12, figured that was enough begging for a lifetime. A few days later, Leona came home from work with a brown paper bag of groceries. I helped her unload them, mostly canned goods and freezer meals. While I was stacking green beans in the cabinet, she said, almost like an afterthought, "School's hosting some awards thing this Thursday. They mentioned your name." I blinked. They did. "Yeah, some community service thing. You got nominated. They want you there." The auditorium was packed that night. Parents in stiff button-downs, moms with proud tears, siblings fidgeting in their chairs. Leona came. She wore her nicest blouse and brought a disposable camera from Walgreens. I knew better than to expect anyone else. When it was my turn, I walked up to the stage and took the certificate without flinching. People clapped. The principal smiled. It was all very polished. In the program brochure, under each student's name, there was a photo section labeled My Family. Most had pictures, graduation shots, family vacations, studio portraits. Mine was blank. The space beneath my name sat white and untouched, like it had been skipped on purpose. I didn't explain why I hadn't submitted anything, because how do you send in a photo when none exist? As I sat back down next to Leona, she didn't say anything, just reached over and gave my hand a quiet squeeze. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't moved, but because I'd started learning how to survive applause meant for people who were never in the picture to begin with. Some girls get erased from the frame. Others learn to stop standing still. The certificate from the school ceremony stayed folded in my top drawer for months. I never framed it, never mentioned it again. But something about that empty photo box on the program, it changed me. I stopped wondering if they'd come back. I stopped hoping they'd see me. Then, out of nowhere, they did. It started with a voicemail. I was doing dishes late one night. The window cracked open to let out the steam from the pasta pot still hissing on the stove. My phone buzzed against the counter, and I wiped my hands on my shirt before pressing play. "Hey, it's Mom. Just thought it'd be nice to catch up. You know, have dinner, like old times." I stared at the phone for a while, letting the water run until it overflowed the sink. There were no old times, not between us. Whatever history she thought we shared, it didn't exist on my side of the timeline. I didn't call back, not right away. I sat with it for a few days, replayed the message more times than I want to admit. Her voice had a softness I didn't recognize, like she was trying on empathy for the first time and wasn't sure if it fit. Eventually, curiosity won. I agreed to meet. One dinner, I told myself. No expectations. Just closure, if that's what she was really offering. The restaurant she picked was in Charleston, upscale. White tablecloths, crystal water glasses, piano music that was meant to feel elegant but came off as forced. I arrived 5 minutes early. They were already there. All of them. My mother, in pearls and a fresh blowout. My father, still as expressionless as I remembered. Romilly, tapping on her phone like she hadn't spent a decade pretending I didn't exist. And then, Jaron. I hadn't seen my younger brother since he was a teenager. Now he was a man with perfect teeth and a designer watch, like someone who'd stepped out of a catalog for people who don't sweat. They all stood when I approached, like this was some reunion show, and I was the dramatic reveal. "We're so proud of you," Mom said, pulling me into a hug that didn't land. "Look at you, successful, strong, just like we raised you to be, like they'd raised me." Dinner started with small talk. Romilly mentioned a yoga retreat. Dad nodded silently, cutting into his steak like it owed him money. I sipped water and waited. The real reason I was there came with the dessert menus. "We actually wanted to ask you something," Jaron said, leaning forward with practiced charm. "I'm starting a business. It's got real potential. And we thought, maybe this could be a family thing. You know, finally reconnect. Build something together." Mom chimed in before I could respond. "You've got more than enough now, Miyuki. It's not about money. It's about legacy. About helping your brother succeed like you did." Romilly added, "It would mean a lot to all of us." I looked at the three of them, polished, rehearsed, dripping in that fake warmth they only seem to find when they want something. My father said nothing. He never did. His silence was his favorite form of denial. I folded my napkin slowly and set it beside my plate. You think because I have a few commas in my bank account now, you can rewrite how this went? I said, quietly but firmly. You didn't raise me. You removed me. You chose a version of this family without me in it. And now that I made it anyway, you want to stick your names on the end of my story? Miyuki, my mother snapped, the softness gone in an instant. Don't be dramatic. We did what we had to do. No, I said, standing up. You did what made your lives easier. Don't confuse the two. Outside, the rain had started to come down. Not heavy, but enough to make the air thick with the smell of wet concrete. I pulled my coat tighter and stepped away from the restaurant's glow, heading for my car parked down the block. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice again. You owe us, Miyuki, after everything we gave up for you. I stopped walking, turned halfway, enough to see her standing in the doorway, arms out like she was on stage. I paid for my own survival, I said. I won't fund your rewrite of my story. Then I got in the car and drove away. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't even raise my voice. But what scared them most was that I finally knew that. I didn't hear from them again for a few days after that dinner. The silence felt like an echo chamber I'd lived in once before, predictable, hollow, and strangely comforting. But just as I'd begun to settle back into the quiet, the call started. The first one came on a Tuesday morning while I was in a meeting. It went to voicemail, so did the next 3. By the end of the day, I had 7 missed calls. 2 from my mother, 1 from Romilly, and 4 from numbers I didn't recognize, but carried the same area code I hadn't dialed since I was a teenager. I listened to them that night, sitting on the couch with a bowl of cold rice in my lap and the TV playing something forgettable in the background. Hi, sweetheart, my mother said in the first message, her tone overly sweet and eerily measured. I've been thinking about our dinner. I'm sorry if we came on too strong, but we really believe in family, you know? We were there when you had nothing. It wouldn't kill you to give something back. Romilly's voice in the next one sounded clipped, like she was annoyed she even had to do this. Hey, I don't know what your problem is, but Jaren's been working really hard on this. He's actually trying. You of all people should understand how important a second chance is. And then came the worst of them, the ones from the unrecognizable voices, the family friends, the church ladies, the cousins I hadn't spoken to in over 2 decades. It's embarrassing, Miyuki, one woman sighed into the phone. You're making your parents look bad. People are talking. What kind of daughter treats her mother like that? That line stuck, not because it hurt, but because it was textbook. Public pressure disguised as morality. I didn't answer any of them. I didn't owe them an explanation. But I knew it wasn't over. A few days later, while I was folding laundry in my apartment, my phone rang again. I almost ignored it, but the caller ID said, Mom. Something told me to pick up. I answered on the 4th ring. Miyuki? Her voice was thin, like she'd been crying. I'm here, I said calmly. She exhaled like it was rehearsed. I don't know what we did to make you so cold. We did our best. Do you think it was easy raising a child on our own? Do you think it didn't cost us anything? Mom, I interrupted. You didn't raise me. There was silence, then a sniff. We loved you. No, you loved the idea of me, until I became inconvenient. Miyuki, she said sharply. That's not fair. No, I replied. What's not fair is rewriting the past so you can live with it. I hung up. Not in anger, but in clarity. Later that evening, the guilt campaign escalated into video. Romilly sent a group chat message, me, her, and Jaren, linked to a video call. I nearly declined, but some part of me wanted to see just how far they were willing to go. They were both on camera when I joined. Romilly with her perfect posture, sipping something green out of a glass mug. Jaren in a crisp shirt, probably freshly ironed by someone he never tipped enough. My mother wasn't on the call this time, but her absence was a tactic, not an accident. Romilly started. Look, we're not trying to guilt trip you, but there's a way to do things, Miyuki. You don't just ice out your family because you're doing well. You mean the family that iced me out first? I asked. You think everything we did was out of malice? Jaren added. Come on. You've got more now than you ever would have had if you stayed. You should be thanking us. I blinked slowly. You honestly believe I owe you for being thrown away? Romilly's tone turned bitter. Don't be dramatic. What you gave me, I said, was silence. I built something in spite of that, not because of it. I left the call before they could respond. That night, I couldn't sleep. My apartment was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional city siren in the distance. I sat at my desk and pulled out a piece of stationery I hadn't touched in years. I wrote them a letter, not to send, but to say what I needed. I don't hate you. I'm not bitter. I just refuse to be the product of a narrative you now want to revise. I don't exist to ease your guilt or prop up your story. I am my own beginning, and you don't get to insert yourselves into the middle now that there's an ending you find convenient. I folded the paper and placed it in the drawer, with the rest of the things I've outgrown. And just like that, I started sleeping better again. The following morning, I felt different. Not lighter exactly, just cleaner. As if something that had been rotting in me for years had finally been cut out. I didn't need a reply to that letter. I didn't need them to understand. I just needed them out of the way. But I'd underestimated them. It started with a screenshot. I was on my lunch break, sitting at a quiet corner table in a cafe near my office, when a friend from Charleston, someone I hadn't spoken to in months, texted me a message that simply read, "Is this about you?" I opened the attachment. There it was, a Facebook post from my mother. Public. Tagged. Shared. Some children forget who raised them. Some choose wealth over family. I did my part. And God sees everything. Attached was a photo of me as a little girl, probably 6 or 7, missing teeth, bangs uneven, smiling like I still believed things would work out. The caption under the image said, "She changed. We didn't." My first reaction wasn't shock, it was disgust. The way she used that photo, that specific moment in time, to suggest she had anything to do with who I became. It was calculated, deliberate. By the time I finished my coffee, the post had gained over 60 likes, mostly women I vaguely remembered from our old church, cousins who hadn't sent a birthday card in decades, neighbors who only ever saw me as the one they sent away. I didn't reply. I didn't comment. I took screenshots. Every single comment, every share, every tag. And the comments, they stung. She used to be so sweet. Guess money really does change people. I remember when her mom would walk her to Sunday school every week. Shame what success does to loyalty. Mothers aren't perfect, but they're still your mother. It was a well-organized character assassination, cloaked in faux spirituality and sweet Southern passive aggression. I muted my phone and went back to work. My face didn't change. My tone stayed even. But something shifted internally. A click, like a lock turning in the dark. That night, after I'd double-checked every legal document tied to my name, I emailed my attorney, Mr. Kroll. I told him what was happening, included the screenshots, and asked what recourse I had to shut it down. He called me first thing the next morning. "This is textbook defamation," he said. "The kind that doesn't seem like much, until it costs you something. You're a public figure in your field now. Let's not wait until it damages more than your name." By the end of that week, we had a formal cease and desist letter drafted. I read it twice before signing. To Delora and Harlan Brandt, it began. This letter serves as official notice to immediately cease all defamatory, harassing, and emotionally manipulative communication directed at or concerning our client, Miyuki Rhodes. I didn't send it by email. I paid extra to have it hand-delivered. I wanted them to open something for once and realize it wasn't a gift. The day it was delivered, I kept my phone close, half expecting another avalanche of voicemails or a dramatic post about being betrayed by their own daughter. But nothing came. Not immediately. Instead, I got texts from more people in Charleston, people I hadn't spoken to since I was a child. Some asked if I was okay. Others just said, "Your mom seems hurt. Maybe give her a call." It was almost funny, as if damage control wasn't a strategy, but a prayer request. I didn't respond to any of them. Later that week, I met with Kroll in his office. We sat across from each other, the letter laid out between us, and he asked, "What outcome are you hoping for?" I didn't hesitate. "I don't want an apology. I want distance, papered and documented." He nodded. "You're not the first client to ask for that. But most people still hope the other side will change." I looked him in the eye. I stopped hoping when I was 9. As I walked home that evening, the sun was starting to dip behind the skyline, casting long shadows on the street. I passed a florist and bought a single daisy. No reason. Just because it felt like something the girl in that childhood photo might have liked. When I got home, I placed it in a small glass on the kitchen counter. Then I logged off everything. No more feeds, no more mentions, no more holes in my piece disguised as family outreach. They wanted a scene. I gave them silence. They wanted guilt. I gave them paperwork. 3 weeks passed after the cease and desist letter was served. Quiet weeks, no calls, no sudden, "How have you been?" texts from relatives I barely remembered. No fresh social media campaigns disguised as prayers. It would have felt like peace if I didn't know better. One Saturday morning, I returned from the grocery store and found a padded envelope tucked into my mail slot. No sender listed. Inside was a photocopy of a legal document, a version of my grandmother Hazel's will. Only this one didn't look like the one I remembered her showing me years ago, in her kitchen, while she was still lucid and still trusted. In that version, I was her sole heir. In this one, my name was gone. Deleted. No notes, no corrections. Just a clean surgical removal, as if I'd never existed in her lineage at all. Everything was listed under Delora and Romilly. The signature page looked newer, printed with a different date than the original I recalled. For a moment, I thought I might scream. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water, sat down at the kitchen table, and took out my phone. "Leona," I said when she answered, her voice soft with sleep. "Do you still have the original will?" She didn't hesitate. "It's in my desk drawer. Why?" I exhaled. "Because someone's been playing God again, and this time they brought ink." 2 days later, a copy of Hazel's handwritten will arrived via overnight mail. My name was there, in capital letters, underlined. She hadn't left me the house out of obligation. She'd made that choice on purpose. I called Kroll the next morning. The following Monday, we filed a formal petition in Charleston County to contest the most recent version of the will and trigger a probate hearing. This wasn't about property. It never was. I didn't need the house. I didn't even want it. What I wanted, what I demanded, was the truth on record. The day of the hearing, the courthouse lobby buzzed like a wasp nest. Local attorneys, paralegals, family friends, who had clearly taken the day off just to spectate. Some people smiled at me with sympathy. Some didn't hide their judgment. Delora sat 2 rows ahead of me, in a lavender blazer and pearls, the picture of a mother scorned but composed. Romilly wore black, as if this were a funeral. Harlan looked the same as always, present in body, absent in spirit. The judge, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses and the aura of someone who didn't tolerate posturing, called us to order. Kroll presented our evidence clearly and calmly. The date discrepancies, the differences in witnesses, the missing language that Hazel had always insisted on including. And then he pulled out a flash drive. "If the court will allow," he said, "we have an audio file, recorded accidentally by Ms. Leona Vass during a phone call with Mrs. Brandt. The content is relevant to the decedent's intent regarding the will." The judge nodded. The courtroom fell still as the playback began. Delora's voice crackled through the speakers, sharp and unmistakable. "Miyuki! That girl's not worth keeping. She's just a mouth we don't need." There was an audible intake of breath across the room. I didn't move. Romilly turned toward Delora, eyes wide, lips slightly parted. Delora said nothing. Her chin lifted slightly, defiant in the face of her own voice. The judge asked for silence. Then, after a brief recess, she returned with her decision. The court finds sufficient cause to validate the original version of the will submitted by Ms. Rhodes and deems the revised version inadmissible due to inconsistent execution and evidence of undue influence. It was over. No fireworks, no shouting, just the dry thud of a gavel and the rustling of papers. Outside, the clouds had started to gather, pushing the sun behind a dense layer of gray. I didn't stay long. I shook Kral's hand, thanked him, and walked toward the exit. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, I heard the clicking of heels behind me. Delora. She caught up quickly, stepping in front of me. "You think you're better than us now?" she said, voice low but venomous. I paused, looked her in the eye. "No," I said evenly. "I just don't need to be part of you anymore." She blinked. Once. Twice. Then scoffed and walked away, her heels tapping the pavement in a staccato rhythm I didn't follow. I stood there a moment longer. Then I turned in the opposite direction and kept walking, and that was the last time I let her speak my name without earning it. The morning of the ruling came quietly. No texts, no warnings, no passive-aggressive prayers posted on social media. Just a gray sky, a silent cab ride to the courthouse, and the rustle of case files in Kral's briefcase beside me. Inside, the courtroom was half empty. No camera crews, no cousins whispering behind their hands, no Romilly with her disapproving glances. Delora and Harlan weren't even there. I had a feeling they already knew the outcome. The judge entered, glasses perched low on her nose, and read through the findings without theatrics. It was clinical, precise, and exactly what I needed. "This court validates the original will submitted by Ms. Miyuki Rhodes," she said, "and rules that all revisions submitted after the decedent's date of cognitive decline are null." The gavel came down like punctuation at the end of a long, misshapen sentence. It was over. Kral shook my hand as we stepped into the hallway. I thanked him, then made my way outside alone. The Charleston air was thick that day, the kind of humidity that clings to your skin like old regret. I didn't go back to New York right away. A few days later, I was invited to a local business recognition event, some Chamber of Commerce thing I barely remembered agreeing to. They wanted to honor me for my philanthropic work, especially for a small scholarship I'd started in my grandmother Hazel's name. I thought about skipping it, but something inside me said I should go. So I did. The event was held in a ballroom downtown. Lights dimmed just enough to feel expensive, servers carrying silver trays of bite-sized food that tasted like paper. I wore a navy dress and no jewelry. I didn't want to shine, I just wanted to show up. And then, halfway through the night, I saw them. Delora and Harlan, seated near the front, dressed as if this were their gala. My stomach clenched, but I kept moving, one foot in front of the other. I didn't approach. I didn't wave. I simply waited for my moment. They didn't wait at all. Before the formal part of the program began, I overheard Delora speaking with a local news crew. "She's always been driven," she said, her voice warm, sugary. "We raised her to work hard, to aim high. We couldn't be prouder." Harlan nodded beside her like a decorative prop. I stood behind a pillar and listened. She was rewriting the entire script again, except this time the audience was the public. "She's very private," Delora continued, "but we've always been a tight-knit family. We support each other in everything." I nearly laughed, but I didn't. I saved it. When the MC finally called my name, I walked to the stage slowly, heels quiet on the carpet, hands steady despite the fire in my chest. They handed me a glass award with my name etched into the surface, and I thanked them with a polite nod. Then I turned to the mic. The room hushed. "I didn't grow up in a home," I began, voice level. "I grew up in a closet. I studied by the light of a desk lamp that flickered every time the heater kicked on. I paid my way through school working shifts that didn't end until morning. No one clapped for me back then. No one claimed me when it was inconvenient. A ripple moved through the audience. I let it settle before continuing. So, if you see me standing here tonight, don't mistake it for some story of a supportive family lifting their daughter toward greatness. I didn't arrive here by invitation. I built the door myself, and I walked through it alone. Silence, then slowly applause. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't the kind that lifts a roof off, but it was honest, earned. I stepped down without looking at the table where Delora and Harlan sat, but I felt them leave. I didn't need to look to know her smile had cracked, that his silence had deepened. Later, outside the building, I stood for a while under the awning, letting the wind touch my face. One of the organizers approached and asked if I wanted to stay for photos. No, I said. I think I've said what I needed. As I walked back toward my car, I passed a flower shop and stopped to buy another daisy, same as before. I placed it on the passenger seat and smiled at the ridiculous tenderness of it. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't justice. It was mine. The next morning, I woke up early, not from an alarm, but from the quiet hum of something unfamiliar. Peace. I made coffee, black and strong, then stood by the window watching the steam curl upward like a ribbon trying to escape. I was halfway through my second cup when my phone lit up on the counter. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to check. It was a text. Just a single sentence. Hey, I saw the speech. I don't want anything. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, and I hope you're okay. It was from Ephraim. I hadn't heard from him in years. My older brother, the one who never spoke against what happened, but also never joined in. He'd stayed silent like Dad, but there was something about his silence that felt different, less of an escape, more of a prison he'd built around himself. I stared at the message for a long time. My thumb hovered over the reply button, but I didn't type anything. There was no anger left in me for him, no hunger for apology either. But that message, it meant something. Maybe not everything, but enough. I smiled softly and placed the phone face down. By the end of that week, I was back in Charleston, not for court, not for confrontation, but for something else. I parked in front of the house Hazel had left me, the one they tried to erase me from, and stepped out into the late afternoon sun. The lawn had grown wild since the last time I was there, vines creeping along the porch railing like the house was trying to reclaim itself. I didn't flinch. Inside, everything still smelled faintly of old furniture and lavender soap. I opened every window, let the light pour in, and walked room to room in silence. I wasn't here to move in. I was here to transform it. Over the next few weeks, I met with lawyers, contractors, nonprofit advisors. I signed paperwork. I built a mission. I named it the Hazel Initiative. It would be a home, not for me, but for young women aging out of foster care. The ones who'd spent too many birthdays in shelters, too many nights in temporary places that became permanent far too quickly. They'd get clean rooms, a roof, someone to listen, and the dignity of not having to beg for love. When the city asked for a mission statement, I wrote it myself. Not everyone gets a second chance, but sometimes you can build one for someone else. It wasn't about being noble. It was about choosing to plant something in the soil where I was once buried. On the day of the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I kept it small. No press, no speeches, no honorary plaques. Just the new residents, a few trusted friends, and a quiet moment under the front porch where Hazel once sat with a book in her lap and the world at a distance. That night, as the house settled with its new heartbeat, I stayed behind for a little while. I sat on the front steps with a blanket around my shoulders, watching the porch light buzz gently above me. No one else was around, just the night air and the faint sound of laughter from inside. The kind I never heard in that house growing up. And for the first time, I didn't feel like something was missing. My phone buzzed beside me. A message from Ephraim again. Just 2 words this time. Thank you. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. They still don't know me. They still might say my name with bitterness. But it doesn't matter. I don't live in that house anymore, physically or emotionally. And for the first time, I don't need them to come looking. Some family leaves scars. Some leave shadows. But sometimes we get to decide what grows in their place. Before we wrap this story, I want to say something from my heart, especially to anyone out there who's ever been pushed aside, talked over, or told to stay silent. Sometimes the hardest part of healing isn't what they did to you. It's realizing they'll never apologize for it, and still choosing to move forward anyway. I used to think justice had to look like revenge, that it had to be loud, painful, final. But now I know the real win is peace. Quiet, steady, self-built peace. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not go back, even when the door finally opens. So here's my question to you. Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you most? Have you ever built your life from pieces they didn't want? If that's your story, or even part of it, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know. If this story hit home, type 1 in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. If it didn't connect with you, I still want to hear why. Let's start a real conversation. And if you've ever had to rebuild after being erased, know that you're not alone. If this video spoke to you, please consider subscribing to the channel. I've got more real stories coming. Stories that heal, stories that hurt, and stories that might just help you breathe a little deeper. Thanks for being here. I'm listening, always.